This is Alexis Rivers interviewing Gwen Webber-McLeod on. So, can you tell me a little bit about where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born in Nuremberg, Germany in 1956. I am the daughter of a career military couple. My parents are Charles and Barbara Webber. My parents met at a historically Black college, North Carolina A&T, and married as teens in their late teens, early 20s. And when my father graduated from college, he was a commissioned officer, a lieutenant colonel, and our family began our journey as a military family in the segregated army.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I do. We are iconically known as the Webber girls. There are four of us. My younger sister, Terry, passed away in 2003, but we still speak of her in the present because she's very much with us. My oldest sister's name is Misha Cheryl Webber Aiken. She's an entrepreneur, retired from New York State, and lives in a beautiful little home in the woods just outside of Buffalo. She's a badass. She's a hunter, farms her own land, rides a motorcycle, a professional ballet dancer. Then my other living sister is Kim Webber Jenke. Kim and her husband live in Atlanta, Georgia. They own a very high-end glass blowing company called Jenke Glass. And my sister Kim is a breast cancer survivor. We're very proud about that. And she's also a co-owner of a fitness company in Atlanta called Fit and Fine. She's a Zumba instructor. Then my sister Terry, who passed away, was a speech language pathologist, an SU graduate, lived in Atlanta, Georgia as well, and taught in a school district in Marietta, Georgia. And then there's me. I'm the middle child, Gwen Webber-McLeod.
So, what was life like growing up for you?
I had a very fabulous life that set the tone for who I am as a woman today. So as I mentioned, my father started his career in a segregated army. So as a result of that, we traveled extensively. I've lived in every section of the United States except New England, Hawaii, and Alaska. I've lived in a state and every other part of the country. And my parents were very intentional about raising us. And when they discovered that they had four daughters, I delivered a speech at the Women's March in Seneca Falls a couple of years ago called The Accidental Feminist, because my parents realized that the way to help their daughters be successful was to make sure that we were highly aware of the world. There was never a day of our lives where we weren't absolutely convinced that we could be anything we wanted to be. And they really made us extremely Afrocentric, extremely proud to be Black. So doing this journey at that time, a segregated America with two parents who were absolutely convincing us that we could be anything we want to be. I remember talking to my mom about this as an adult woman, and she said, well, now I'll tell you, some of that stuff I told you you could be, I was lying about, because a Black person nor a woman could be any of those things. But she didn't want to dim our lights. She didn't want to kill my dream. If I wanted to be an astronaut in the 50s or 60s, she was telling me I could be. And so as a result of that, I really feel like my life as one of the Webber girls was a great adventure that was combined with learning about the world, claiming America as my own, believing that it was my birthright to be and pursue anything that I wanted to be, while simultaneously, with intention, learning that if I was going to become a successful woman, I had to also be a social justice activist.
Did you have any particular family traditions that you can remember from growing up?
You know, I would say the biggest one in our family was about education. And literally, we were brainwashed to believe that you just went from elementary school to middle school to high school, and high school to college. And I was an RA in a dorm at SUNY Potsdam in my junior year. It was final weeks, and all the young women on my floor were losing their minds. And I called my mother and said, it never occurred to me till right now that not everybody goes to college. And she just kind of laughed and said, you know, the brainwashing took, get a 4.0 and get those girls together so they get 4.0s too. So I would say that education is a huge tradition in our family. Claiming America as our own, no matter what the country thinks of us. My parents always raised me to believe that this country belongs to me. Therefore, it's my birthright to have equal opportunity and access to all of it. And then subtly and not so subtly making me very Afrocentric, I would say, as a tradition. I also think understanding money and how it works. My father was a rough and tumble Army colonel by the time he retired. And he used to always say, Webber girls, money talks and bullshit walks. And he would say that to us because what he recognized is he was growing up as a professional, is that money, having money, accessing it, knowing what to do with it, that combined with education was going to help his daughters combat racism and sexism. So those traditions, celebrating those things, being very proud of being Black, education, creating generational wealth, are traditions that we are now passing on to our children, our grandchildren, and my parents' great-grandchildren.
What was your house like growing up?
It was very interesting because, you know, when you're an Army kid, you move every 2 to 3 years. So a couple of things that really strike me is it was very high energy. There were always a lot of people in our house, and there were always very diverse groups of people in our house because that's what military bases are. So if you went to Fort Drum right now, you would see a child that is mixed race with every kind of combination of parent you can imagine. Well, that started to be my reality at a pretty young age. And it was always full of, my parents were both belonged to Black Greek letter organizations. So my father is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. My mother is a member of Sigma Gamma Rho sorority. So Black Greek life was always very part of our household. So I was always watching men and women who, through their relationship with their fraternity and sorority, were always about the business of public service. So it was always about volunteerism, always about talking about, you know, what was going on in the Black community and what we need to do about it. Lots of parties, lots of fun, and lots of really open, honest, respectful conversation. And like any family, of course, you know, we've had our ups and downs and challenges, you name it. Sometimes my sisters and I say our story could be a Lifetime movie. But it was really fabulous. And it was really designed to make sure that the vision that my parents had for their daughters came to fruition in our adult lives. So they were very intentional about what went on in our house. It was like a VIP lounge. If you weren't on the list, you didn't get beyond the velvet ropes because they were very busy making sure that we were not only physically safe, but that we were psychologically safe. Lots of education, tables full of Jet magazine, Essence magazine when that came out, Ebony. My father was reading hip hop publications when we didn't even know what hip hop was, you know, just making sure that we were always aware of our culture and what the cutting edge was. And one of my favorite traditions that I mentioned that's connected to this is that every once in a while, my father would have cultural enrichment Sundays. My parents would, and then my mother would set the table with formal china, and we'd be drinking grape juice, and we'd listen to opera. The first time I heard Jesus Christ Superstar, my father bought it and made us listen to it and read the lyrics. And we were always thinking, like, this is really crazy. But what we now know is that he was grooming us for job interviews. You know, I went out when I was the director of the National Women's Hall of Fame for that interview. They handed me the wine list and I knew what to do. I knew I needed to pass that test, but I was so thankful that my father taught me how to navigate a formal dining table. My parents did. And so, you know, that's what our house was about. It was like a training center for young Black women. And as a result of that, we became accidental feminists. They didn't set out to make us feminists. They did set out to make us strong, confident, proud Black women. And because we happened to be girls, being feminist was a residual effect of that.
Did your family follow a particular religion growing up, and do you still follow it today?
My parents, my father was born into Southern Baptist faith, and my mother belonged to an African Methodist Episcopal church. Again, we lived on military bases, so we had Protestant chapels that we attended, but that was another way that my parents were really open with us in that they exposed us to all kinds of religions. So when we had Jewish friends, then we went to synagogue. And I think what they were really trying to do was to lay a foundation for us to believe in something, but they weren't specific about what that something needed to be. They exposed us to all kinds of religions so that when we became of age to make a choice, we could choose whatever we wanted to be. So I've attended both African and Methodist Episcopal churches. I'm currently a member of Roosevelt Memorial Baptist Church. And a lot of that for me is not necessarily about the theology, but about it being important to me that I be in a worship space that's about my Blackness. I spend every waking hour in my company pretty much being the only Black person, unless I'm in an organization that's about Black people. So when I am able to attend church or attend a church, my preference is to walk into a Black space because I don't have to do anything but be Black and praise God for using my life in such a great big way. I will also say that in addition to the foundation laid by my parent, though, I'm very open. Like, I look at other religions. I believe in mind, body, spirit things. I have followed spiritual teachers. So ultimately, my personal goal is to leverage my faith to allow me to be a constant manifestation of God's love and light on earth, and to, with intent, leave a gentle impression of good everywhere I go. And I use religious thinking, scriptures, spiritual reading to create that framework for me as a woman, so that I can go to bed every night being clear that I did what I believe God called me to do. And I actually think of my current company in many ways as my ministry. I incorporated it, Gwen Inc., to allow me to be working in a space that let me do the work that I believe God has called me to do. So I would say that faith in religion and spirituality is very important to me.
Did you have any hobbies or special interests as a child?
Actually, I did. My parents, again, exposed us to everything. So if we were curious about it, they paid for the lesson. And as I grew up and was a student at SUNY Potsdam, my undergraduate degree is in psychology, but I have minors in sociology, anthropology, and dance. I actually had enough credits that I could have majored in modern dance, but there wasn't a major at Potsdam at this time. And so I would say that dance, like formally, modern dance was a hobby of mine. I also love music, and I love to dance. I always tell my kids, tell your friends to come over, I'll dance battle any of them and probably beat a few of them, because I do think I'm fly, hip, and ageless. Now I think I am fly, hip, and ageless. And so I love dancing. I literally love to think. I love to be intellectually stimulated. People laugh when I say that, like, what do you do on your time off? I'm like, think. Sometimes that can be a gift and a curse. But I'm intrigued by the world around me. I'm intrigued by how people engage in the world. I'm always shocked that I only know what I know, but I'm so thankful that other people know what they know, because that's how I get stimulated. I enjoy spending time with women and young women. I'm a mentor and an executive coach to some of the best and brightest women, millennial women coming up. And I would say, I think of that not only as a hobby, I think of it as a historical obligation, that it's incumbent upon me as a Black woman who's standing on the shoulders of many Black women who came before me. I don't think it's an accident that I live in Harriet Tubman's chosen hometown. And I feel like it's my responsibility to pay her legacy, the legacy of enslaved women, my legacy forward, by staying strategically placed in the lives of emerging minority women leaders and creating pathways for them. And so to do that, I founded a not-for-profit that's called You Can't Fail, Inc. Our tagline is because your history says you can't, because I meet so many young Black women who are telling me sort of like this song on their heart. And I'm saying, well, why wouldn't you do that? And as they start to expose self-doubt, as all young women do, because we all are on the journey to finding our self-esteem, I always challenge them by saying, how dare you think you can't do something when you descend from the few African women who made it to America on slave ships and became doctors, lawyers, the first Black woman millionaire. So what do we need to do to get you believing that you can do anything, because your history tells you that you can? So I don't know if you would think of those as hobbies. Maybe they're more passions of mine, but those are spaces that I spend my extra energy. And I have a lot of it.
Was there any sort of popular books, TVs, games, music type of stuff growing up that you can remember?
Mm-hmm. What things that influenced me heavily, I mentioned them previously, were always being surrounded by Ebony magazine, Jet magazine, and then Essence magazine was a game changer for me as a young woman. I wasn't seeing myself reflected in popular media, and then to have an entire publication devoted to my head, heart, and spirit, and that presented a woman who looked like me as beautiful. And as we navigate the dynamics of colorism, me being a dark complected Black woman, to see that feature in a public magazine presented as beautiful and bright and like every damn thing was life altering for me. And I want to be clear that my parents never made me feel any kind of way about being a dark complected Black woman. My father actually was 3 times darker than I am from a color point of view. But they also knew that at a certain point, I would be trying to find myself. And so they were constantly presenting images to me that let me know that being me and looking like me was okay. And that people started creating products that I could use to enhance my beauty in ways that I wanted to. So those African-American publications, I'd say, were very central to who I am as a woman. I've read Iyanla Van Sant's book, Acts of Faith, Daily Meditations for People of Color, when I was a student at SUNY Potsdam, probably just heading out of college. It was life altering for me in that having something to focus on daily that allowed me to verbalize and articulate who I really wanted to be as a woman was very powerful to me. So that book really inspires me still. And then In the Spirit was a collection of essays written by Susan Taylor, who was the, I think, editor-in-chief of Essence magazine, and she used to write a monthly essay that really resonated with my head, heart, and spirit. Of course, I love Maya Angelou's books. A lot of Toni Morrison's books have affected me. So those kinds of writings by Black women were really powerful in my life. 2 other books, the academic books that were really powerful were, the first one was When and Where I Enter. I had the opportunity to be the 3rd executive director of the National Women's Hall of Fame when I was 28 years old and very young in my career. And the organization was young, so I was a fit for what they needed in a leader at that time. And I studied women's history in college. I was in that first wave of women that could get academic credit for studying the history of women. And my professor, Dr. Judith Ramlett, I was the only Black woman in the class, made a point of pointing me in the direction of writings by like Sojourner Truth, learning about Harriet Tubman, because textbooks literally weren't talking about Black women. And then as I left Potsdam only being clear about one thing, that I would only work for companies or organizations that had a demonstrated commitment to Black people and women. So as I grew and designed my career to allow me to do that, when I was at the Women's Hall of Fame, I was having a conversation with one of our historians, and I said to her, why aren't there more Black women in the Hall of Fame? And she said, well, because Black women weren't really doing anything in the 1800s, at which point I thought, you're interesting. She wasn't a historian selecting the people who went in there much longer. But then I started the search. So When and Where I Enter by Paula Giddings is an incredible piece of work that defines what Black women were doing in America from 1619 till, I think the book published in the late 80s, early 90s, that changed, was life-altering for me. Because it solidified my place in the world, and it grounded me in this belief that I am historically obligated to pave the way for new generations of Black women. And then another book that I read that was a compilation, one of the editors, I think was Bell Hooks, was called, I want to get the title right, All the women are white, all the men are Black, but some of us are brave. I think that's the title. It's some play on that words. And it was an anthology of essays written by women that I would define as the first Black feminist that I ever came across, that again was just confirming and affirming for me that the way I was experiencing the world was not, I was not a woman alone in that thinking, and gave me the courage to craft my career solely devoted to only working for people that had demonstrated commitment to Black people and women. And those were books that really changed my life. A final one was Our Bodies, Ourselves, which was like a a big book that was out, I'd say in the 70s, that was really about women's sexuality and health, and very detailed and graphic. And my mom wanted us to have power over our bodies. So one day I come home and this book is in the middle of the coffee table with Essence, Jet, Ebony, everything else. And I pick it up and I open it. Of course, there's all these diagrams of body parts and all these things about women. I close the book and she says, listen, you really need to know about your body. You need to understand it. You need to have control over it. And you need to understand your sexuality and how to express that in a healthy way. So I want you to read that book. And if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And if not, I'm going to take you to Planned Parenthood. So that collection of information laid the foundation for who I am today.
You mentioned owning your own business. What other sorts of jobs have you had growing up?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting because when I went to the career office at SUNY Potsdam, I said, I don't really know what I want to be when I grow up, but I'm only going to work, now this is 1974, for companies and organizations that have a demonstrated commitment to Black people and women. This was way before the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation was happening. But somehow, I think when you could speak things into existence, and I think when I said that out loud, the universe just conspired to help me have this fabulous career. So my first job right out of college, I was a community educator for Planned Parenthood up in Watertown, New York. And I worked with pregnant and parenting teens and their parents. And I did a lot of community programming around healthy sexuality. I was a sexuality educator, healthy sexuality, helping young girls and their parents understand what to do with their bodies, why it's important to have a gynecologist, helping teen parents navigate being a teen parent. I was then shortly recruited here to Cayuga County, where I was hired by what's now known as the Cayuga-Seneca Community Action Agency. I was probably about 24. My first boss was a Black woman named Gloria Griffin. She happens to be my husband's aunt. I wasn't married to him at the time. And she trusted me. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so I was the director of the human services component of her agency. They had been running a safe home program for women who were victims of domestic violence, had received some funding to formalize the domestic violence program. She handed me that grant, and that was my first big responsibility here in Auburn, to design, educate the community, and then find the shelter and hire the staff so that we had a formal space for women living through domestic violence. I worked there for a couple of years, got that up and operational. Then I was the executive director of the Booker T. Washington Community Center from, like, I want to say probably about 1983 to 1985. After that, I was the executive director of the National Women's Hall of Fame from about 1985 to, I want to say, 1988 or so. And then I became a professional Girl Scout. I was the director of communications and development for the Seven Lakes Girl Scout Council, and was among the first wave of Black women in the country who were being hired with intention to be part of they were calling it a pluralism initiative at that time. So that was the first wave of diversity, equity, and inclusion business that I had been experiencing in a formal way. And then while I was a Girl Scout, I became pregnant with my second child. I have two children, Ashley, who's 30, and my son 35, and my son Travis, who's now 30 with Travis. And I was at a meeting, and a woman named Melina Carnicelli, who eventually became Auburn's first woman mayor, approached me to be on the board of directors of what is now known as Leadership Cayuga. And afterwards, she said to me, well, what are you going to do after you have that baby? I said, you know, I'm going to probably go back to being a professional Girl Scout, but I want to own a business sometime. And she said, I'm going to talk to you about that. So she stalked me until she figured out that my baby was about 5 months old, took me out to dinner, never told me who this other person was that we were meeting with. She wound up being Bethany Angier, who was the woman that actually recruited me for CAP to come to Auburn. And we allowed ourselves to imagine owning a business. And the only thing we committed to doing was meeting twice a week to simply incubate this idea and fantasize about what this company could be. And after doing that for about 6 months, we stumbled upon a client. Now, mind you, we all have high profile jobs at this point. And we went in the underground, took this client on, and it was very successful. Melina left her job, and we started a company that was called Treble, T-R-E-B-L-E Associates. And our tagline was, you, your project, and us. We did project management, marketing, branding, positioning work. And then over time, Melina and I had facilitation skills and had done a lot of professional development work. We started a division of the company called Creating Respectful Workplace Teams. And I managed that part of the business. And so I left my job as a Girl Scout in 1990. And we thought that it would take us about 5 years to all get into the company. As soon as people knew we were free to work for them, our company just got flooded with clients. So I would probably went into the business about 2 years after we formalized our partnership. And then I've been an entrepreneur ever since then. So I was with Treble Associates for about 4 or 5 years. Then I left there for a while. My girlfriend, Lisa Marsh Ryerson, was the president at Wells College when she took the college co-ed, and I was her director of communications through that process, because when your girlfriends call, you show up, and that was a big deal. So she needed to have somebody that she trusted highly to manage media for her. And then during that time, I kept a very quiet consulting practice where I did strategic planning work. And part of my professional story is from 1995 to 2005, I was in a 10-year nonstop season of grief. That began with my daughter having a very serious cancer diagnosis as a 10-year-old, followed by my father winning a historic election up in Watertown by becoming the first African-American male to be elected to the county legislature, was sworn in 10 days later, he got a terminal cancer diagnosis, died 6 months after that. That led into 2001, where my best friend, Captain William F. Burke, Billy Burke, was killed in the World Trade Centers, which led into a dear friend of mine getting a dual cancer diagnosis. She died in September of 2003. I went on a vacation with my mother and my sisters. My mom was on the Miss New York State pageant board, so we always went to the Miss America pageant. Picture that, a bunch of Black feminists at the Miss America pageant. We mostly spent our time in the club dancing and having drinks with the cute boys. And then that November, after that vacation, I was talking to my sister, Terry, and she said she was going to talk to me next week. And the next week she was going to talk to me was December 3rd, and she died from a cardiac arrest. So I was building all of these businesses by being completely grief-stricken. And after a while, grieving gets very boring. So one of the things that I started doing was incubating, fantasizing about a business that I might want to own someday. So I just really thought about it for 10 years. So near the end of my tenure at Wells, my mom just happened to call me one day and she's like, "How are you doing?" And I was like, "You know, Mommy, I'm either going to crawl to the bottom of my bed and never get out, or I'm going to manifest this idea, this business that I think is the place where I'm supposed to do what I need to do." And my parents were military and relatively conservative. And she says, "Quit your job." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, my kids will be eating cornflakes for 3 meals a day." And she says, "No, if I ever thought that one of the Webber girls would die unexpectedly at 45, I would have told your sister to quit her job and do what she wanted to do too." And I was being resistant. And as the universe goes, a former client of mine, someone I hadn't worked for 7 years, starts calling me. And I'm just like blowing them off, right? Because I'm in the middle of helping my friend take this college co-ed. And he calls me 2 or 3 times and I'm like, "No," he's like, "Our employees really want you to come back and do this work." I'm like, "I can't, I'm grief-stricken, I'm crazy, I got this big project." And I had a little strategic planning consulting company going too. And finally, I sarcastically asked him, "How much money are you gonna pay somebody to do this anyway?" And when he told me, I had the opportunity to make my entire Wells College salary in 6 months. So I felt like that was God telling me to jump. So I, within 14 days, resigned that job, was back in Atlantic City with my mom, one Webber girl down, walking on the beach and having this conversation with God, whom I lovingly refer to as Dude. And I was like, "Dude, if either you're telling me that I'm going to get this opportunity, or you're telling me not to be afraid to manifest this idea, because I can attract the kind of money to myself that I need." I got home, I got that opportunity. That led to me doing a pre-run of my company called Gwen Webber-McLeod, inspiring people to new levels of leadership. And I decided that all of my clients were only going to be mid-level to executive level leaders. I went to graduate school, graduated in 2006 with a master's in management, disclosed that I was going to do this to a bunch of my girlfriends on September 11th, 2007. And in 2008, my current corporation, Gwen Inc., was formally incorporated in New York State. So I had quite the journey to leadership. And I started at a very young age. Like I mentioned, I was only 23 when I moved to Auburn. And it was that journey to leadership and the journey of being a Black woman growing as a leader that led to me thinking that there should be a private sector business that's solely devoted to helping people who are leaders by choice, promotion, or hiring be the best they can be. And the attributes, the competencies that I see in myself and other very talented leaders is confidence, competence, courage, and calm. So our company mission is that we help leaders achieve business goals by focusing on the competencies of confidence, competence, courage, and calm. My company's been in existence since 2008. We're based in Auburn. Most of our clients are here in New York State, but we work nationally. And I travel nationally and lecture on the topic of leadership from my point of view. I'm very unique in the industry. There are very few Black women in the leadership development industry. It's predominated by white men my age or older. And that's why I created my not-for-profit, create pathways for younger women leaders to navigate the dynamics. We trademarked a term called the unexpected leader to define this type of leader. So she breaks what I think is a cement ceiling for minority women. And she's experiencing being a first, only, and different, gaining and sustaining credibility with her peers because they don't expect it to be her. And it's not because she lacks qualification, it's because of microaggression and unconscious bias. And then all of our clients in the not-for-profit and in my private sector business where I work with executive level women, also are concerned about their legacies because they know whether or not another woman of color has the same opportunity she has will be based on her performance and primarily perceptions of her performance. So in that space at our company, we work with these women individually to help them craft their first 90 days on their job so they can normalize their leadership for people who don't expect it to be them. And I just feel very blessed. So, you know, my company, we serve all kinds of leaders. And frankly, a lot of our clients are white men because they're the CEOs of companies. But I feel very blessed to be able to leverage my life experience and to really have acted on that thing that I was just saying as a little 19-year-old girl. Like I was going to only work for companies or organizations that had demonstrated track records of commitment to Black people and women, to now have leveraged all of that to create this company that works nationally out of this cool little office space in my home in Harriet Tubman's hometown. How about that? That's really exciting to me. I could say this, I hope this doesn't come across as vain, but I'm very proud of myself from a historical perspective, because I do believe I'm historically obligated to not only honor Harriet Tubman, but to honor Kate Freeman, who was the first Black woman who ever came to Auburn in 1793 with the founder of Auburn. And no one ever talks about Kate Freeman here in Auburn. So I have a t-shirt in my office with her name on it that's here every day as a reminder that I'm obligated to her and to Harriet Tubman and every Black woman that came after them and before me to do my work in this community in this way. And that a significant focus of my work has to be creating new generations of confident, competent, courageous, and calm Black women leaders.
You mentioned Kate Freeman. Is there any other sort of history that you think about when you think of Auburn or Cayuga County that isn't common knowledge, isn't published history?
Mm-hmm. I would say that Auburn knows very little about its past and current Black residents. And I would not only say that I don't think they know, I don't think as a community, we know very little. I've not seen interest in knowing about Auburn's Black community. So when I moved here, one of the catalytic events for me for coming here was that I would be living in Harriet Tubman's hometown. And when I arrived here in 1980, there was not a visible indicator that this amazing woman who has done more in America than any man that I know of any race, that she even lived here. So you almost had to know somebody who knew that her house was here and that she was buried here in order to even know that she had lived in Auburn, New York. The only, and I'm talking about public evidence, was I think there's a plaque on one of the, maybe the county courthouse building that honors her. There was not a sign. There was nothing that would let you know that Harriet Tubman lived here, and no one except for people that were really studying her historically, the Harriet Tubman Boosters Club, members of the AME Zion Church. If you didn't know those folks, you wouldn't have known she lived here. I find that appalling, to be honest with you. And I want to say that I felt, and I still feel this way sometimes, that it's almost as like the community was simultaneously proud and ashamed of that historic fact. I experienced that in Seneca Falls too. There are factions of people, or at least when I was there in the 80s, early in 80s and 90s, that were not like real happy that Seneca Falls is known for the first women's rights convention. I felt that same vibe, and I feel that same vibe about Auburn and Cayuga County. And there's evidence of it all the time. You can read the Auburn newspaper anytime her name is mentioned and someone's like, there's more to our history than just her, or look up the research on trying to name a school in our district after Harriet Tubman. And the most racist, vile things are coming out of the mouths of high school students, their family members, and frankly, I hate to say it, even educators in the community about honoring her. Kate Freeman, if you don't know, you would never know, because no one ever talks about her. She and Harriet Tubman gave me the courage to run for my political campaign in 2019. And I think generally speaking, Auburn's relationship with its Black community is similar to a quote by a young Black woman actress that was like a gong in my brain when she said it. And she said, America loves Black culture, but hates Black people. And I think we are seeing increasing evidence of that right now in this political environment. And I hate to say this about a place that I've lived for almost 40 years. I moved here to live here and raised my family here. My husband, his family's DNA is in the dirt of this community. I think that that's still true about Auburn from a political point of view. That doesn't mean that there aren't great white people here and that there aren't great white people who are being great allies to us. But if you monitor the local media, as recently as 2 and 3 months ago, we have a sitting county legislator who is very comfortable saying the most racist things from the floor of the county legislature. And so I think that a lot of work has to be done in our community to get right with its history, not only of African Americans, but its relationship with Native American community, its relationship with women. I think a lot of work has to be done. But I would say that the Black community is, from a historical point, is almost invisible. When you read about Kate Freeman, you realize that this woman who came here as an indentured servant, she wasn't a slave, she was indentured. Once she worked off her servitude to Hardenberg, she bought property, she laid the foundation for so many things that became the springboard for African American families that have lived here for generations, and our community never talks about her. I think that's problematic. And I think we're doing a disservice to the children of our community by not talking about these women and other people of color, because these kids are growing up in a world that the workforce is going to look like this. In the next 5 to 10 years, up to 85% of the people entering the workforce are going to be women, people of color, and millennials. I think we do a disservice in communities to children. We don't teach them their full history. And then they leave Auburn and they go somewhere where they might have a Black boss and have never interacted with a Black person before in a deep, meaningful way. So what gives me hope about this is that when the George Floyd protests started happening in Auburn, the first march was about 200 young people and they were predominantly white. And I think that visual and them challenging their parents about white privilege, racism, all related things is beginning to cause a tipping point in our community. But I think if current leaders don't create space for emerging leaders to cause the community to tip, I could come back here in 50 years and still Auburn could be in this condition. And that's not what I hope. So I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that that's not the community's reality. But I think that's a big problem here from a historical perspective, honoring the community's history.
Well, thank you very much for being a part of the project.
I'm very honored.